In example 5, we're going to see how changes to fixed costs affect the break-even point. Let's consider a company that produces chairs with fixed monthly costs of $25,000. Each chair costs $65 to produce, and it sells for $115. Due to an increase in their rental costs, the fixed costs of the company increased by 15%. Determine how the increase in fixed costs affects the break-even volume, and compare the net profit before and after the increase in fixed costs when monthly sales are 1,000 chairs. First of all, let's take a look at the break-even volume. Under the current scenario, the cost price of each chair is $65, so our variable costs are $65 per chair times the number of chairs. The selling price of each chair is $115, so we know that our sales revenue is going to be equal to $115 per chair times the number of chairs. When I subtract my variable costs from my selling price, I will end up with a contribution margin of $115 minus $65, or $50 per chair times the number of chairs. The contribution margin is the amount of money that's left over after all of your variable costs are met in order to pay your fixed costs. The fixed costs of the company are $25,000 per month. So currently, we'll set the fixed cost to $25,000 per month, and the break-even volume at break-even, our net profit is going to be equal to $0. And so what that means is that our contribution margin must be equal to our fixed costs at the break-even point. So we've got 50N is equal to $25,000. Solving this equation for N, we end up with N is equal to $25,000 divided by 50. N is equal to 500 units. So under the current scenario, N is equal to 500 units in order to break even. So we'll make a note of that and say, what happens after the increase in fixed costs? Well, for one thing, nothing happens to our sales. Our sales are still going to be $115 per unit times the number of units. In fact, our variable costs remain the same. There's no change to our variable costs. They're still $65 per unit times the number of units, which leaves us with the same contribution margin of $50 per unit times the number of units. What happens after the increase in fixed costs is that our fixed costs go up from $25,000. They go up by 15%. So the fixed costs are going to increase by 15% to a new fixed cost. How do we increase a number by 15%? Well, our new fixed costs will be equal to our old fixed costs of $25,000 multiplied by a factor of 1 plus 15%. In other words, our new fixed costs will be $25,000 multiplied by 1.15. And 15% more than $25,000 works out to an amount of $28,750. So again, at the break-even point, our profit is equal to 0. And so at the break-even point, our contribution margin must equal to our fixed costs. So our contribution margin must be matched at $28,750, and so now we have a new equation where we have to solve for N. N will work out to a value of $28,750 divided by 50. The new break-even volume works out to be an amount of 575 units. So in other words, with the increase in our variable costs, we now have to sell 75 units more than we had to sell before. In Part B, we'd like to compare the two scenarios with sales of 1,000 units per month. Again, under the current situation, we have $115 per unit times the number of units. In this case, it will be $115 multiplied by 1,000 units, or $115,000. Our variable costs are going to be $65 per unit times 1,000 units, or $65,000. And what's left over will be our gross profit, or our contribution margin, of $50 per unit times $1,000 or 1,000 units, and that will end up being $50,000. And when I subtract from my contribution margin my fixed cost, that leaves me with a net profit of $25,000 currently. So at unit sales of 1,000 units, I will end up making a net profit of $25,000. Well, with the increase in fixed costs are going to go up by 15%. And we've already discussed this. With an increase of 15% in our fixed costs, our new fixed costs will end up being $28,750. So $28,750 is our new fixed cost after the increase. Our selling price is still going to be the same. It'll be $115 per unit times the number of units minus the $65 per unit times the number of units, leaving us with a contribution margin of $50 per unit times the number of units, or $50 per unit times $1,000. Our contribution margin stays the same. It's still going to be $50,000. But when I subtract my increased fixed costs, I end up with a net profit that is a little bit smaller. Our net profit is $21,250 with the increase in our fixed costs. So in other words, the net profit is down by an amount of $37.50 from what it was before. Previously it was $25,000, now it's $21,250. That's a decrease of $37.50 from our previous scenario.